I discovered water in my basement on a Tuesday morning in March, which seemed odd considering we hadn't had rain in nearly 2 weeks here in Riverside, California. The puddle spread across the concrete floor near the eastern wall, seeping from somewhere I couldn't immediately identify. I'd lived in this house for 6 years without a single leak, and now suddenly my storage boxes were floating in 3 inches of murky water that smelled like lawn fertilizer and mud. My name is Vincent Foster, and I'm a mechanical engineer who works from home most days. That morning, I'd gone downstairs to grab some old tax documents when I stepped into what felt like a shallow pond. My socks were instantly soaked, and I watched in disbelief as the water level seemed to actually be rising while I stood there. This wasn't a slow seep from groundwater. This was active flowing water coming from somewhere. I waded through the mess and pressed my hand against the foundation wall where the water seemed darkest. The concrete was cold and wet, but I couldn't feel any obvious cracks. Then I noticed something strange. The water was flowing in a pattern, coming strongest from the corner where my property line met the HOA common area behind my house. The Riverside Estates Homeowners Association maintained a large communal space back there with a tennis court, playground, and some walking paths. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside to investigate. The morning sun was already warming up what would be another 70-degree day. My backyard looked normal enough, the grass still green from our winter rains, my patio furniture undisturbed. But when I walked to the back fence line, I saw it immediately. Someone had dug a trench. A deep, deliberate trench that ran along the property line between the HOA common area and my yard. The trench was maybe 2 feet wide and carved into the earth with machine precision. More importantly, water was flowing through it like a miniature river, coming from somewhere in the common area and channeling directly toward the corner of my foundation. I stood there staring at this drainage ditch for a solid minute, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't natural. This wasn't erosion. Someone had deliberately excavated this channel to redirect water away from the common area and straight toward my property. My phone was in my pocket, so I took about 20 photos from different angles. The trench was fresh, maybe a day or two old based on how the exposed earth hadn't fully dried yet. I followed it back into the common area, hopping my fence to see where it originated. About 40 feet into the HOA property, I found the source, the tennis court. The pristine, recently resurfaced tennis court that had been the pride and joy of our HOA president, Deborah Sutton, who fancied herself some kind of country club administrator despite managing a modest, middle-class neighborhood. The court had a drainage problem. I could see standing water pooling on the far corner where the surface had settled unevenly. Rather than fix the court properly, someone had decided to cut a trench to drain that water away, directly into my basement. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office number. A cheerful recorded message informed me that office hours were Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 9 to noon. It was Tuesday, of course it was. I tried Deborah's personal cell number, which was listed in the community directory for emergencies. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice already carrying that particular tone of irritation she reserved for homeowners who dared interrupt her day. "What is it, Vincent? I'm at my Pilates class. My basement is flooding. There's a trench that's been dug from the HOA tennis court straight to my foundation, and it's channeling water into my house." Silence for a moment. "Then I'm sure you're mistaken. The HOA hasn't authorized any drainage work. I'm looking at it right now, Deborah. It's fresh excavation, maybe 40 feet of trench, directing water from the tennis court problem area directly toward my property. The tennis court is HOA property. We have every right to manage drainage on our own land." My jaw actually dropped. "You can't drain water onto my property. That's illegal, and it's flooding my basement. If water is naturally flowing toward your house, that's not the HOA's responsibility. You should probably check your waterproofing, Vincent. Houses require maintenance, you know. This isn't natural flow. Someone dug a trench. I'll have to discuss this with the board. We meet next Tuesday. In the meantime, I suggest you handle your basement situation. Goodbye." She hung up. I stood there in the common area, water flowing past my feet through the illegal trench, and felt my blood pressure rising. Deborah Sutton had been a thorn in every homeowner's side since she'd been elected HOA president 3 years ago. She'd fined people for leaving their trash cans visible from the street for more than 2 hours after pickup. She'd sent violation notices for mailboxes that were the wrong shade of black. She'd tried to ban vegetable gardens as unsightly agricultural activity. But this was different. This was actual property damage. I went back to my house and called a water damage restoration company. They arrived within 2 hours, 4 guys with industrial pumps and dehumidifiers. The crew chief, a weathered man named Roberto, surveyed my basement and gave a low whistle. "You got maybe 200 gallons down here. Where's it coming from?" I showed him the wall where the water was seeping through. He examined it carefully, then asked to see the outside. When I showed him the trench, his expression darkened. "Someone did this deliberately. This is directed flow. You got a neighbor with a grudge? Ho with a drainage problem they decided to make into my drainage problem. Roberto shook his head. That's super illegal, man. They can't do that. You should call a lawyer. His crew spent 4 hours pumping out my basement and setting up equipment to dry everything out. The bill came to $1,800. My homeowner's insurance would cover some of it, but I'd still have a $1,000 deductible and probably a rate increase for filing a claim. I spent that evening documenting everything. Photos, videos, measurements of the trench. I even walked to my neighbor's house, an older retired couple named the Mitchells, to ask if they'd seen anything. Mrs. Mitchell confirmed she'd seen a small excavator working in the common area on Sunday afternoon. I thought it was odd they were working on the weekend, she said, but I figured it was HOA business. They had that little yellow digger machine, like a bobcat or something. Sunday. That meant Deborah absolutely knew about this work. She'd probably ordered it herself. That night, the water continued. My basement stayed wet despite the dehumidifiers running constantly. Every few hours I'd go down and find new water spreading across the floor. The trench outside was still flowing, channeling runoff from the HOA sprinkler system that watered the common area every morning at 6. By Wednesday morning I was exhausted and furious. I'd barely slept, getting up every couple hours to check the basement. My water bill was going to be astronomical from running the sump pump continuously. The restoration company said I'd need at least a week of drying time, maybe longer depending on whether the water stopped. I tried calling Deborah again. Voicemail. I sent an email to the HOA board email address, carefully documenting the situation with attached photos. I sent a certified letter to the HOA's registered address. I even posted in the neighborhood Facebook group, asking if anyone else had noticed the new drainage work. That post got taken down within an hour. I received a terse message from the group administrator, who happened to be Deborah's friend Paula, informing me that complaints about HOA business weren't appropriate for the social group. Thursday morning, I woke up to find not only was my basement still flooding, but now I had a formal notice from the HOA taped to my front door. It was a violation warning. Apparently, my fence needed repainting, and I had 7 days to comply or face daily fines of $50. My fence was fine. I'd painted it 18 months ago. This was retaliation, pure and simple. I called my homeowner's insurance company to file a formal claim. The adjuster said they'd send someone out within 5 business days. I explained this was ongoing active damage, and she sympathetically explained that was still their standard time frame. In the meantime, I should mitigate damages by keeping the water pumped out, which I was doing, at great personal expense. While the HOA did nothing, Friday afternoon I took a personal day from work and drove to a lawyer's office in downtown Riverside. Jennifer Chen specialized in property law and HOA disputes. Her office was in a modest building near the courthouse, and her walls were covered with framed news articles about cases she'd won against various homeowners associations. They dug a trench to drain their tennis court into your basement? She looked up from the photos on her laptop, eyebrows raised. That's remarkably bold. And remarkably stupid. Can I sue them? Absolutely. This is textbook property damage and illegal drainage. California law is very clear that you can't alter drainage patterns to push water onto neighboring properties. But litigation takes time. Months, probably longer. In the meantime, your basement keeps flooding, so what do I do? Jennifer leaned back in her chair, thinking. You have the right to protect your property from ongoing damage. That means you could take reasonable steps to stop the water flow. You could fill in the trench where it crosses onto your property. You could build a berm. Legally speaking, you're allowed to prevent water from being artificially channeled onto your land. What if I just blocked the trench completely? Not just on my property, but where it starts. She smiled slightly. If you did work on HOA common property, that could be considered trespassing or vandalism. However, if water then backed up onto HOA property as a result of them having poor drainage on their tennis court, well, that would be their problem to solve properly, wouldn't it? I'm not advising you to do anything illegal, Vincent, but you have every right to protect your property line. I left her office with a consultation fee of $300 charged to my credit card and an idea forming in my mind. Jennifer had been careful with her words, but the message was clear. I couldn't legally go onto HOA property and destroy their drainage work, but I could absolutely protect my own property line. And if that had consequences for the HOA's improper drainage solution, that was their problem. That evening, I went to Home Depot and bought supplies. Sandbags, about 40 of them, several bags of quick-setting concrete, some heavy-duty plastic sheeting, some landscaping timber. The total came to just over $400, which I carefully saved the receipt for. Saturday morning. I started my project. The trench crossed my property line about 6 feet before it reached my foundation. That 6-foot section on my land was absolutely mine to modify however I wanted. I started by filling it completely with sandbags, packing them tight. Then I covered the sandbags with the plastic sheeting. folding it over multiple times. But I didn't stop at my property line. I very carefully, very deliberately extended my dam across the property line into the HOA common area, stacking sandbags and plastic sheeting to create a complete barrier. I used the landscaping timbers to reinforce it, driving stakes into the ground to hold everything in place. Then I mixed the quick-setting concrete and poured it around the base, sealing everything together. It took me about 6 hours of work. By late afternoon, I had constructed a solid dam approximately 3 feet high and 4 feet wide, running perpendicular to the drainage trench. The water that had been flowing toward my house now had nowhere to go. I stepped back and surveyed my work with deep satisfaction. The trench on my side was completely blocked. Water was already starting to pool on the HOA side of my dam. I went inside, took a shower, and made dinner. Around 7 that evening, as the sun was setting, I heard shouting from the common area. I looked out my back window and saw Deborah Sutton standing near my dam, her face red even from a distance, pointing and gesturing wildly at my construction. She had her phone out and appeared to be taking photos. My doorbell rang aggressively about 10 minutes later. I took my time answering it. Deborah stood on my porch, practically vibrating with rage. She was dressed in tennis whites, a racket in her hand, and I realized she must have been at the courts when she discovered my work. "What the hell have you done?" she demanded. "Good evening, Deborah. I've taken steps to protect my property from illegal drainage." "You vandalized HOA property. You built that thing on common area land." "I built a protective barrier primarily on my own property to prevent water from being artificially channeled into my basement. If some of that barrier extends slightly beyond my property line, well, I had to ensure complete coverage." "You had no right." "The board will fine you for every day that structure remains. You'll be in violation of at least 6 different CC&Rs. "Which CC&Rs specifically? Because I've read them all, and none of them give the HOA permission to flood my basement." Her face was getting redder. "The HOA has the right to manage common area drainage, sure, on your property. You don't have the right to drain onto mine. That's California Civil Code Section 832. You also violated Section 3346 regarding water trespass. Would you like me to continue? Or should I just refer you to the letter my attorney will be sending you?" That stopped her. "Your attorney, Jennifer Chen. She specializes in HOA litigation. She's very excited about this case, actually. Said it's one of the most clear-cut examples of illegal drainage she's seen." Deborah's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "The board will hear about this, I'm sure they will, and when they do, you might want to mention that I've documented everything, including timestamps showing the trench was dug before my basement flooded. Also that I attempted to contact you multiple times and you refused to address the issue. Also that you then sent me a retaliatory violation notice for a fence that's in perfect condition." My attorney found that detail particularly interesting. She turned and stormed off my porch without another word. I closed the door and allowed myself a smile. The next morning, Sunday, I was woken at 8 by the sound of machinery. I looked out to see a county water department truck parked in the common area, along with Deborah's Mercedes and 2 other cars I recognized as belonging to board members. Several people in reflective vests were examining the tennis court area. I got dressed and walked out to investigate. The tennis court was a disaster. The entire surface was underwater, at least 4 inches of standing water covering every bit of the court. Water was also pooling across the walking path and had flooded a good portion of the grass in the common area. My dam had done exactly what I'd intended. With nowhere to drain, all the water from the sprinkler system and from the court's poor drainage had simply accumulated. One of the water department guys was talking to Deborah, gesturing at the flooded court. I couldn't hear the conversation, but Deborah's body language told me everything. She was defensive, arms crossed, head shaking. The water department guy looked increasingly annoyed. I stayed on my property, just watching. After about 20 minutes, the water department truck left. Deborah spotted me and marched over, 2 other board members trailing behind her. I recognized them as Frank Morrison and Janet Wheeler, both retired busybodies who'd been on the board for years. "You need to remove that dam immediately," Deborah said, trying for authoritative but landing somewhere around desperate. "No, this is causing flooding on HOA property. Actually, your tennis court's poor drainage is causing flooding on HOA property. My dam is preventing flooding on my property." Frank stepped forward, trying for a reasonable tone. "Vincent, be practical here. We can work this out. But we need that drainage flowing again. Into my basement." "No thanks, Frank. We could redirect it," Janet offered. "Dig a new channel that goes around your property. Or you could fix your tennis court properly. Resurface it with proper grading. Install actual drainage that connects to the storm system like it's supposed to." Deborah's eyes flashed. "Do you have any idea what that would cost? Do you have any idea what my damages are?" $1,800 for emergency water extraction so far. Another $1,000 insurance deductible. Probably $3,000 in repairs once everything's said and done. plus my attorney's fees, which are billed at $350 per hour. So yeah, Deborah, I'm very aware of costs right now. The three of them huddled together, whispering furiously. Finally, Deborah turned back to me. The HOA will reimburse you for the water extraction costs if you remove the dam and the insurance deductible and the repairs, and my attorney's fees? That's excessive. No, what's excessive is digging an illegal drainage trench into my property and then acting like I'm the problem for stopping you. What's excessive is retaliating against me with fake violation notices. What's excessive is ignoring my calls and emails and then being surprised when I take action to protect my own house. This isn't over, Deborah said coldly. You're right about that. My attorney is filing a lawsuit by end of business tomorrow. You'll be served within the week. They left. I went back inside feeling vindicated but also exhausted. This was rapidly spiraling into something much bigger than I'd anticipated. I'd wanted to protect my basement. Now I was apparently in a full-scale war with my HOA. The next few days were relatively quiet. My basement finally started drying out now that water wasn't continuously flowing in. The restoration company removed their equipment on Tuesday, declaring the space dry enough but recommending I keep an eye out for mold over the next few weeks. The tennis court remained flooded. I checked it every morning during my coffee, watching the water level slowly rise as the automatic sprinklers continued their scheduled watering of the common area. By Wednesday, the water was 6 inches deep and spreading. Some homeowners started complaining in the neighborhood Facebook group, asking why the tennis court was unusable. Those posts also got deleted. Jennifer filed the lawsuit on Monday as promised. On Thursday, I received a formal response from the HOA's attorney, a guy named Richard Pelletier who worked for a firm that specialized in defending HOAs. His letter was full of legal threats about my unauthorized structure on common property and demands that I remove it immediately or face fines and legal action. Jennifer's response was swift and brutal. She sent a letter detailing every California code the HOA had violated, attached documentation of all my damage, included statements from the water remediation company about the source of the flooding, and finished with a demand for $15,000 in damages plus attorney's fees. Friday afternoon, I got a knock on my door from a county inspector. He was a middle-aged Hispanic man with a clipboard and a tired expression that suggested he'd seen everything.
Vincent Foster? I'm Carlos Medina, County Code Enforcement.
We received a complaint about unpermitted construction on your property. Let me guess, Deborah Sutton filed it. He smiled slightly. I can't reveal who makes complaints, but I need to see this structure I'm hearing about. I walked him to the backyard and showed him my dam. He examined it carefully, took some photos, made notes. Then he walked into the common area and looked at the trench, the flooded tennis court, and the water line on my foundation from where it had been seeping into my basement. So let me make sure I understand this, Carlos said. The HOA dug that trench to drain their tennis court toward your property. It flooded your basement. You built this barrier to stop the water. Now their court's flooded instead. That's accurate. And you have documentation of the flooding in your basement. Proof the water was coming from this direction. I showed him everything on my phone. Photos, videos, the invoice from the restoration company, even the measurements I'd taken of the water flow. Carlos nodded slowly. Okay, so here's the thing. Technically, you did build a structure that partially extends onto HOA property without permission. That's a violation. However, you have an absolute right to protect your property from water intrusion. The HOA's drainage work was illegal and caused you damage. In situations like this, we generally take the position that property owners can take reasonable defensive measures. So am I getting cited? I'm going to write this up as a property line dispute and recommend both parties resolve it through civil court, which you're already doing. I'm also going to send a separate citation to the HOA for illegal drainage modification. That carries a $500 fine per day until it's corrected. I tried not to smile too widely. Per day. They need to fill in that trench and restore natural drainage patterns. If they want to improve their tennis court drainage, they need to file for a permit and do it properly, connecting to the actual storm system. Carlos left after giving me a copy of his report. I immediately texted Jennifer with the update. She responded with a thumbs-up emoji and a message saying this would strengthen our case considerably. Saturday morning, I was woken by the sound of heavy machinery again. I looked out to see a full construction crew in the common area, including a large excavator. They were digging. For a moment, I panicked, thinking they might be trying to redirect the trench somewhere else. But as I watched, I realized they were digging a proper drainage line from the tennis court toward the street, where the actual storm drains were located. This was what they should have done in the first place. The work took all weekend. By Sunday afternoon, they'd installed a proper drainage system, filled in the original illegal trench, and were in the process of pumping water off the tennis court. The court surface was probably ruined from sitting underwater for over a week. But at least it wasn't flooding anymore. I left my dam in place, partially out of spite, but mostly because I wanted physical evidence of what I'd done and why I'd done it. The structure itself was solid enough that it would take significant effort to remove. On Monday, I received another letter from the HOA's attorney. This one was much less aggressive in tone. They were proposing a settlement. The HOA would pay all my documented damages, including the water remediation, my insurance deductible, estimated repair costs, and $4,000 toward my attorney's fees. In exchange, I would remove my dam and agree not to pursue further legal action. Jennifer and I discussed it over the phone. "It's not a bad offer," she said. "You'd be made whole financially. The only thing we're not getting is punitive damages or a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. What do you think I should do?" Honestly, the discovery process in a full lawsuit would be expensive and time-consuming. We'd win, I'm very confident of that. But it might take a year or more, and your costs would go up before they'd be recovered. This settlement gets you compensated now. It's practical, but Deborah gets away with it. She's already facing county fines of $500 per day from when the violation was issued until they fixed it. That's going to cost the HOA several $1,000s. Plus they had to pay for emergency drainage work over the weekend, which probably ran $20,000 or $30,000. Plus their tennis court needs resurfacing, which is another $15,000 to $20,000. Trust me, Deborah is not having a good month. That made me feel better. Okay, let's take the settlement. The paperwork was finalized by Wednesday. The HOA cut me a check for $12,800, covering everything we'd documented. I signed a release agreeing not to sue them for this specific incident. Jennifer kept about $3,000 of the attorney's fee payment for her work so far, which seemed fair. On Thursday morning, I rented a small excavator and spent about 3 hours removing my dam. The sandbags went into my truck for disposal. The timber got stacked in my garage for future projects. The concrete was broken up and hauled away. By noon, the barrier was gone. The trench was still filled in from the HOA's remediation work. Water was no longer flowing toward my house. My basement was dry. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I received a notice for the next HOA board meeting. The agenda included several items, but one jumped out at me immediately. Discussion and vote regarding special assessment to cover emergency drainage repairs and legal fees. They were trying to pass the costs on to all the homeowners. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening at 7, held in the community clubhouse. I cleared my schedule and showed up 15 minutes early. The clubhouse was already filling up with neighbors, many of whom I'd never spoken to beyond waves and brief greetings. Apparently, word had gotten out about the special assessment. Deborah called the meeting to order at 7 sharp. She ran through some routine business, approval of previous meeting minutes, treasury report, that kind of thing. Then she got to the special assessment. As many of you are aware, the association recently faced unexpected drainage issues in the common area that required emergency repairs. The total cost, including contractor fees, county fines, and legal expenses, came to $47,000. This has depleted our reserve fund significantly. The board is proposing a special assessment of $350 per household to cover these expenses and restore our reserves. Hands shot up around the room. Deborah pointed to a man in the front row I didn't know. Why did we have drainage issues in the first place? The tennis court was fine before. Deborah's expression tightened. The court developed a settling problem that caused water accumulation. We addressed it by digging a trench into Vincent Foster's property and flooding his basement. Someone called from the back. I turned and saw it was Tom Mitchell, the retired neighbor who lived next to me. The room erupted in conversation. Deborah banged a gavel, calling for order. That's a mischaracterization of events. The HOA attempted to address drainage on our property. Mr. Foster took it upon himself to build an unpermitted structure that caused flooding on common areas and necessitated expensive repairs. I raised my hand. Deborah looked like she wanted to ignore me but couldn't without being obvious about it. "Vincent, I'd like to clarify what actually happened, since apparently we're discussing it publicly now." I stood up so everyone could see me. The HOA, without any notice to me or proper permitting, excavated a drainage trench that directed water from the tennis court onto my property. This caused severe flooding in my basement, resulting in thousands of dollars in damage. When I contacted Deborah about this, she refused to address it and actually sent me a retaliatory violations notice for an imaginary fence problem. I was forced to hire an attorney and take defensive action to protect my property. The county cited the HOA for illegal drainage work. The HOA then had to pay to fix their mistake, which they're now trying to pass on to all of us. More eruption, more gavel banging. A woman near the middle stood up. "Is that true, Deborah? Did you really dig a trench into his property?" "The trench was on HOA property. That drained onto mine," I interjected. "I have photos, county reports, everything documented. The HOA broke the law, got caught, and now wants us all to pay for it." Frank Morrison, the board member, stood up. "This is inappropriate. We're here to discuss the budget, not relitigate past issues that are costing us each $350. Someone shouted. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Multiple people were talking at once. Some were demanding to see documentation. Others were calling for Deborah's resignation. A few people near the front were trying to defend the board, saying we should all support the association. Finally, a lawyer named Patricia, who lived 3 streets over, stood up and said loudly, "I move to table the special assessment until the board provides complete documentation of all expenses, including what legal counsel advised regarding the drainage work before it was performed." Someone seconded immediately. Deborah tried to argue that it wasn't a proper motion, but enough people called for a vote that she had no choice. The motion passed overwhelmingly. The meeting ended shortly after, with Deborah looking furious and most of the homeowners filing out in clusters, gossiping about what they'd just learned. Several people approached me to ask questions or offer support. Tom Mitchell clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Good for you, standing up to her." Over the next week, things moved quickly. Patricia, the lawyer who'd made the motion, started circulating a petition to recall the current board and hold new elections. The petition needed signatures from 30% of homeowners to trigger a recall vote. She had that within 4 days. Deborah sent out an email to all homeowners, defending the board's actions and characterizing the recall effort as a vindictive attempt to undermine the association's governance. This backfired spectacularly when someone replied, all with a link to the county code enforcement report, which detailed exactly how the HOA had violated drainage laws. The recall vote was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, the board was essentially paralyzed. They couldn't pass any major decisions without it looking like retaliation or self-serving behavior. I stayed out of most of the drama, which was swirling through the neighborhood Facebook group, email chains, and apparently several competing group chats I wasn't part of. I'd made my point. I'd protected my property. I'd been compensated for my damages. The rest was between Deborah and the other homeowners. The recall election was held on a Saturday in mid-May. The turnout was massive, probably 80% of households. When the votes were counted that evening, the result was decisive. Deborah, Frank, and Janet were all removed from the board by margins of more than 2-1. 3 new board members were elected, including Patricia the lawyer and 2 other homeowners who'd been vocal critics of Deborah's leadership. Deborah showed up to the meeting where the results were announced. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. When Patricia was sworn in as the new president, Deborah didn't even stay for the rest of the meeting. She just left quietly, without any of the drama I'd expected. The new board's first action was to commission a full audit of HOA finances and operations. Their second action was to pass a resolution explicitly prohibiting any construction or modification of common areas that could affect homeowner properties without prior engineering review and homeowner notification. Their third action was to vote unanimously not to pursue the special assessment. They determined that the drainage debacle had been caused by poor decision-making at the board level, and it wasn't fair to pass those costs onto homeowners. Instead, they'd cover the expense by cutting some discretionary spending and using money that had been budgeted for a decorative entrance sign renovation. Life in Riverside Estates slowly returned to normal. The tennis court was eventually resurfaced properly, though it took until August to get it done. My basement stayed dry. I never saw another drop of water down there. Deborah and her husband put their house up for sale in June. I heard through the neighborhood gossip chain that they were moving to Arizona, where her sister lived. Part of me felt a little bad about that. Like maybe I'd ruined her life over what started as a relatively small dispute, but then I'd remember the dismissive way she'd spoken to me on the phone while I had water flooding my home. The retaliatory violation notice. The complete unwillingness to take responsibility or work toward a reasonable solution. She'd had so many opportunities to do the right thing, and at every turn she'd chosen to be petty, vindictive, and arrogant. The house sold in July. I never spoke to Deborah again after that recall election meeting. The new owners were a young couple with a toddler, friendly enough though we weren't particularly close. The new HOA board turned out to be remarkably competent. Patricia ran meetings efficiently, kept emotions out of decisions, and actually enforced the CC&Rs fairly and consistently. Violations were handled with warnings first, actual conversation about problems, and fines only as a last resort. It was like discovering our HOA could actually function the way it was supposed to. In September, I got a call from Jennifer Chen, my attorney. "I wanted to follow up with you on something. The county is prosecuting a case against an unlicensed contractor who's been doing drainage work around Riverside. Your situation came up in their investigation." "How so?" "Apparently, the guy who dug that trench for your HOA doesn't have a proper contractor's license. He's been doing work without permits all over the area. The county is going after him, and they wanted to know if you'd be willing to provide a statement about the work he did." Absolutely. I ended up giving a deposition to a county prosecutor about the trench work and the damage it caused. It turned out the unlicensed contractor had done similar work at 3 other properties in Riverside, always cutting corners, never pulling permits, always causing problems. The county was building a case not just for fines but for potential criminal charges related to fraudulent business practices. I never found out exactly what happened with that case. Jennifer said it would take months or years to fully resolve. But I'd done my part, provided my statement and documentation. By October, 6 months after that first morning when I discovered water in my basement, life had settled into a comfortable routine. I'd learned some things about HOAs, about property law, about standing up for myself. I'd learned that sometimes you have to fight back against petty tyrants, even when it's uncomfortable and expensive and exhausting. Most importantly, I'd learned that a well-placed dam can solve a lot of problems, even if it creates some temporary chaos in the process. My basement stayed dry through the fall and into winter. When the rains came in December, heavy downpours that are rare but intense in Southern California, I watched the water carefully. Every drop flowed exactly where it was supposed to flow, naturally away from houses, into proper drainage systems, eventually to the storm drains and out to the river. The tennis court handled the rain perfectly. The new drainage system worked flawlessly. People played tennis all through the winter on the beautiful resurfaced court, and every time I looked at that court I smiled a little, remembering the week it spent underwater. Remembering Deborah's face when she realized I'd blocked her illegal drainage trench. Remembering that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let someone else's incompetence and arrogance become your emergency. I still live in the same house today. My basement has been dry for over a year now. The HOA sends out monthly newsletters about community events and maintenance schedules. Patricia is still president, running the board with competence and fairness. Property values in the neighborhood have actually gone up slightly, probably because word got out that we have a functional HOA instead of a tyrannical one. Sometimes I see the Mitchells in their yard and we chat about the weather, their grandkids, whatever's happening in the neighborhood. Tom always asks if my basement is staying dry. I always tell him it is. We both smile, sharing the memory of that strange spring when the HOA tried to turn my foundation into a drainage system. Life is good, my house is dry, and if I ever face another HOA problem, I know exactly what to do. Document everything, stand up for my rights, and if necessary, build a dam and let the water flow where it's supposed to flow naturally back onto the people who caused the problem in the first place. The tennis court still stands, properly maintained and properly drained. Every time I drive past it, I think about those days when it sat underwater, a miniature lake in the middle of our suburban neighborhood, the direct result of someone's arrogance meeting someone else's refusal to be pushed around. They say good fences make good neighbors, but in my experience, sometimes a good dam makes for even better boundaries.